as we bring in Julian Council, my friend, Locked On Panthers podcast. Do you share that sentiment that it would be good to see it at least for a couple of series, not this week, but next week? Does the joint practice with the Jets, is that enough?
It would be nice to see because I don't want to watch a preseason game where the starters don't play at all, Adam. I'm being selfish here. Like, I got to sit here and watch all 30 of these games no matter what. I'm not trying to watch the Jack Plummer show. I don't need to see Jake Luton. Come on, man. I was surprised by this decision. It was not anything I ever considered. I suppose in the back of my mind, maybe I did wonder, would Dave Canales be like these new age coaches like a Sean McVay and say that Bryce Young will never play for me in the preseason, which is what Sean McVay said when Matthew Stafford went out there. And that made sense. Stafford was already a known commodity. We knew that he was going to be good in that offense. We knew what he could do. No reason to put him out there in those games. Same thing with Christian McCaffrey. Even when Matt Rule was head coach here, McCaffrey, with all the injuries he suffered in the regular season, he wasn't playing the preseason. Same case out there in San Francisco. If you were a known commodity like Aaron Rodgers, speaking of the Jets next week, and he's coming off the Achilles, you don't need to play in the preseason. But when you struggled last year, you have a new head coach, a new scheme, a new offensive line, a new center, even though Austin Corbett keeps telling us that we're making too big of a deal about that, you would think that you would like to get meaningful reps in the preseason opposed to waiting until week one. Honestly, I would think that next week with the joint practice, with the Jets, a controlled environment, it would make more sense then to not play him in the preseason opposed to this week where your offensive line's healthy. Why not get everyone out there for a couple of series and see what this thing looks like instead of waiting until possibly week 3 of the preseason or week 1 on the road in New Orleans? I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of it from that standpoint. Like, if this was C.J. Stroud, where he had success in Houston, Bobby Slowick's back as a play caller, totally understand. No reason to put him out there. You know this guy's a known commodity in this offense. That's not the case with Bryce Young in this new offense in Carolina and having struggled last year behind a poor offensive line with bad weapons. And there's one, I do understand this one thing, though, the injury aspect.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, the last 2 times the Panthers have played in New England in the preseason, Matt Corral broke his foot, Cam Newton broke his foot. So you got to buck the trend, and the best way to do it is to not play Bryce Young. So I can see it from that standpoint. That turf is cursed, but I would prefer to see him out there selfishly, and I also think it's probably the best thing for this offense moving forward that they actually get meaningful reps in the preseason as well.
I don't remember the Matt Corral injury. I do remember the Cam Newton injury. I guess we can blame it on the turf. I don't really know. But Dave Canales running scared or afraid of the Foxborough curse, the Gillette Stadium curse, is certainly a new one. I live and work in an area where we talk about curses and jinx way too often, so I'm not even going to bucket. Julian Council, Locked On Panthers podcast at Julian Council on Twitter. You mentioned all the, historically all the people. By the way, if it was like C.J. Stroud, he'd play, because Stroud is going to play in the Steelers game on Friday. They already announced it. Like, what are we? That's fine. I have zero problem if anybody plays, because being afraid of injury is kind of silly to me, because you can get hurt on any play in any game. Yes, I understand a game that doesn't matter. My guess is that Stroud will play a series and get out, and they will not risk him in any way. I don't think we're going to see any runs for C.J. Stroud. I also don't think we're going to see any deep balls where he's in the pocket very long. It's just, to me, and this is why it's more about just seeing the operation, right? It's not about the plays. It's not about the success. It's not about first downs. It's about simply having Bryce Young, whether it's under center, unlikely, or in a shotgun, obviously likely, just taking a few snaps, running through how the plays come in, and you could do these things in practice, but it's not the same as doing them in games. So I would just like to see the operation. I actually think that next week against the Jets would give you a much better chance of not having to deal with any of the Jets' scary as all get out defensive personnel, because they are unlikely to play their best players on the defensive side of the ball in that game after the joint practice. So
yeah, and that's what happened last year where, Quentin Williams wreaked havoc. We saw it on Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
If you were down there in Spartanburg, you would also have seen it as well, where the Jets did not play a lot of those defensive players on that Saturday game, and it still was alarming that first two plays, Bryce Young is getting knocked down. One of them was a sack, the other one was a quarterback hit, and you're sitting here wondering, okay, is this offensive line going to be okay this year after they struggled just against Quentin Williams before that in the joint practice? They were supposed to have two last year. The other one got rained out. The Panthers didn't practice. The Jets continued to practice, though, down there at Wofford. I don't really see the injury point of it. I guess it could happen, but as you mentioned, you get hurt on any play. He got sacked 62 times. If this is still something that we are concerned about, then I don't really know why. Yes, it could happen to him, but I don't think it's going to happen because he's small. I think it would happen because it's football. We saw how big Cam Newton was, and how many times did Cam Newton get injured?
Exactly. That was the funny thing leading into draft, whether or not to draft Bryce Young. The interesting thing is that the guy who would be theoretically built for the NFL, Anthony Richardson, got hurt and missed after what did he get hurt in week 3, week 4, and he was out for the rest of the year. Right. So it's right. Dennis just tells me in my ears he had a concussion in preseason, then he had the shoulder injury. I am way more concerned about the shoulder injury because we all saw that's what got Cam. Wasn't the foot. Mm-hmm. It was the second time he hurt the shoulder. Julian Council is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. Let me dig into a couple of I was fascinated. You and I talked about it before last season. The skill position players, and they obviously have upgraded tight end, wide receiver, running back, even though we know Jonathan Brooks is probably a month of the regular season before he's a factor in what they do, and that's fine. But we saw the injury to Leggett. So how concerned are you about that? And with that aside, how much do you think they have improved the receiving corps?
I'm not super concerned about his injury. It's day to day. Foots, that has been a problem, as I mentioned, with Corral and Cam Newton in recent years here in Carolina. But because the MRI came back negative, I'm not super concerned about that. Dave Canales didn't seem to be. He said they dodged the bullet there. I'm sure he'll be back out practice next week. And I'm really curious what his role is going to be anyways. Dave said that he has to earn it. Show us was the quote when he was talking to us after practice a couple of weeks ago, early on in training camp. And even Xavier came out and said after day one that he felt like he didn't have his best practice, that he still got a lot of things he's got to work on. And that has certainly been the case. One of the days I was out there, they made a more concerted effort to give him the ball using jet sweeps. But I thought he was going to be somebody potentially in the kick return, as the new kickoff rules are going to really force teams to return a ball, that he can play a factor there. And if you take too much into take anything out of the depth chart that they put out on Monday, he's not even listed as a returner. And when you watch practice, that's also really been the case. The way they've been doing is they've had someone to return, to have another guy up back there more as the blocker. And anytime I've seen kickoff, it's been Leggett there. So I don't know what his role is even going to be in this offense. Mingo's been the wide receiver 3. He's looked fine. He's looked really good. Because I've only been out there, unfortunately, just when they have shorts on. I haven't been there for the padded practices. I'd like to see him play on Thursday. But by all accounts, even when I've been out there, he has looked good. And he's certainly seems to have more of a bearing grasp on the NFL and the speed than he had last season, where, let's be honest, Thomas Brown, Frank Reich, they threw him out there when he was not even ready.
Right.
Did him a disservice, did the offense a disservice, and he seems to be more prepared this season. But I think Deontay Johnson's going to be a really good player. There's already a connection between him and Bryce. We've continuously seen it. Hoping to see it next week when he's going to go up against Sauce Gardner in that Jets secondary. Adam Thielen, 1 year older, probably going to see him take a step back based off of Johnson coming in being the top guy. But I trust those two. Outside of that, I can't trust Mingo just yet. Need to see it in the preseason, then in the regular season. And then behind him, Leggett, still don't really know what his role is going to be. Amir Smith-Marset, I would say, is probably going to be on the team more as a returner.
Right.
He's been pretty impressive, though, in the offense. I just still don't know if he's going to get enough targets to really be that big of a factor. Running the ball, Brooks, I have a hard time thinking he's going to make an impact at all at this point in time. You're saying week 3, week 4, is he really going to be ready to go week 3, week 4? And when he comes in, is he going to play over Chuba Hubbard? Probably not. No. Is he going to play over Miles Sanders? Both those guys aren't going to be here next year. This team knows they can run them into the ground, and then they can have Jonathan Brooks come into next year fresh and in the second year and be their guy for the next 3+ seasons. So I think that they've upgraded at wide receiver by bringing Deontay Johnson, tight ends. Tavion Sanders has looked better recently, but Ian Thomas being banged up, Tommy Tremble being banged up, that does not help them. It looks like Jordan Matthews is probably going to make the team. I look at one player that they've upgraded, and that certainly is Deontay Johnson. I think they should have a good running game based off of the offensive line pieces they brought in. I don't know how much they truly have upgraded the skill positions until we really get to see it out there on the field this season.
All right, let's get to defense before we have to say goodbye to Julian Council, and I appreciate his time at Julian Council, Locked On Panthers podcast. Defense is going to take a step back, and honestly, I think the defense was a little bit of a mirage. I know the defense is good. I'm not saying the defense isn't good. I don't think the defense was as good as maybe the numbers said, because I thought you can run on the Panthers. Not at will is probably not the right word, but when you needed to, I thought you could run on the Panthers. Now in a 3-4, I don't know if you can still do that. We'll see it all play out. No Brian Burns or Davian Clowney is in, but I want to start in the back end because I don't think they can be that good unless J.C. Horn is that guy. So how has he looked? I mean, this is kind of weird. We've only been in training camp for a couple of weeks. What are your thoughts on him and the rest of the secondary, which might make it easier on the front seven?
Yeah, I mean, the defense, if we look at them last year, like top 4 in the NFL in just total defense, but the advanced stats, they were 23rd in defensive EPA. They were 25th in DVOA, and they were 31st against the run. So the other numbers show you that really wasn't that good of a defense. As far as J.C. Horn goes, like you're right. Like if he gets hurt again, the Panthers are going to look silly for exercising that 5th-year option for next year. And I understand why they did that. It's a guy who you know is a good player. You just got to stay on the field. They potentially saved $8 million had they not done it. He stayed healthy. Then they had to slap the franchise tag on him or give him an extension. But JC's looked good. You trust him as long as he's out on the field to perform. Dane Jackson, there's been a lot of talk about how he's really more of a number 3 corner. I thought he's looked pretty good when I've seen him out there. And Troy Hill's also played really well in that nickel slot corner spot. Outside of that, there is some real concern. Like DiCaprio Boodle has primarily been the guy filling in whenever JC has kind of gotten the blow as the other corner. So he'd be the 3rd outside corner along with Dane Jackson there whenever he's had to fill in. And he's been fine. And he had to play in a couple games last year. Deshaun Jameson was in the same spot, but he's really not had a good camp so far. Lamar Jackson, not the one in Baltimore where the Panthers have their own.
I know.
Dave Canales brought up on Monday as someone who he thinks could help him. He just needs to see it more in the preseason. But like DiCaprio Boodle, Lamar Jackson, like those aren't names of players that you're thinking are going to come in and going to really help you out if there's something happens again to J.C. Horn. I feel like they still need to add another corner, that they need to have some cover there if anything happens to him, because I don't have a ton of confidence there in that cornerback room if something happens to him, which has been the case. As far as safeties go, like they should be fine. Xavier Woods, low-key, is one of their better players last season. I think Jordan Fuller, he fits the scheme more than Von Bell did, even though I think Von Bell's a good player. But Fuller's been in the scheme. Nick Scott, who honestly was terrible last year in Cincinnati, this team really likes him. He's filling in a little bit on special teams with Sam Franklin Jr. with the broken foot right now. I think they're fine at safety. They just got Caden Stearns off the waiver wire. He was in Denver for a season with Fajero Avero. I like the safety group. I do. Corner, though, I like it as long as it can stay healthy. There's just a lot of questions just with the backups and like Charles Smith-Wade, who they drafted in the 5th round of Washington State. He played nickel at the Senior Bowl, was really good at it. But this is the first time he's really been a full-time nickel. You're going to have to give him some time. That seems like more of a pick for next year than for this year. So provided that they're healthy, they should be fine, but they're going to need their friends up front to help them with some pass rush, which I don't think is going to come this season, especially when you look at all the injuries they're having an outside linebacker.
Yeah, no question. And with DJ Wanham still on the PUP list, before I say goodbye to Julian Council, it's going to be a Jack Plummer and somebody, right, as Luton, who, if he doesn't make the team, gets relegated to the championship. Julian and I will understand that was a Premier League joke. I just had to get that in before I said goodbye.
Well, I'm thinking to myself, as a North Carolina fan, get to see Drake May, so there is that.
There is that, although I'm going to talk about this here in a little bit. Drake May is really being set up to have the exact same year that Bryce Young had. The Patriots are a mess.
Don't want him to play. Don't play him. Don't play him. It's fine. If you want to say Drake May's not ready, cool. The team's terrible. Unless they get Ayuk, don't play him.
And they already withdrew from the Brandon Ayuk auction that the 49ers are holding because Ayuk didn't want to play for the Patriots even for $30 million a year on a new contract. So because he recognizes that team's not good. I don't want to go there if they're not good.
He doesn't seem like he's that interested in actually winning. He just wants the money, which I get. I get it.
He turned down. Well, I guess $30 million is not that much money if you're Justin Jefferson. Julian Council, who would never turn down $30 million, by the way. No. Locked On Panthers podcast at Julian Council. Man, thanks for the time. I'll talk to you soon.
Of course. See you, Adam.
You got it.